Welcome to Normal Island, where we talk about the very normal stories that come from this very normal country. Now, as you may have noticed, I'm not Curtis, although he is here.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Alyssa Gucci and I'll be the new host. Now, we want this show to open up conversation, so please feel free to comment below and get involved. Let's get straight into it. On Tuesday, rail workers walked out after negotiations broke down between the networks and the RMT trade union over pay, job security and working conditions. Despite what has been widely reported, it is not drivers that are on strike. These are rail operators, platform conductors, station workers, maintenance workers and so on. And sadly, for much of our mainstream media, it seems that they are unable to do the most basic of fact-checking. As we can see from this tweet from Sophie Corcoran of GB News, we should automate the trains, make them driverless, and see how the train drivers valued their £60,000 salaries for doing virtually nothing after that. Or this tweet from Dominique Samuels, let me get this straight. Half of RMT workers set to strike have received pay rises and bonuses in 2019 and 2020, plus the offer of 2% pay increase in 2022 by Network Rail. Train drivers have seen their pay increase 20 times the rate of average workers. How are these strikes reasonable? But it's not just the workers. Our media have been gunning for RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch all week with a constant barrage of strange questioning, as we can see from this clip here of Richard Madeley asking about Marxism. Let's take a look.
You've been accused severally in the last few weeks of being a Marxist. It happened again last night. A backbench Tory MP said you were a Marxist with no interest in anything other than trying to tear down the government. Now, are you or are you not a Marxist? Because if you are a Marxist, then you're into revolution and into bringing down capitalism. So are you or aren't you?
Richard, you do come up with the most remarkable twaddle sometimes, I've got to say.
I didn't say you were a Marxist. I'm saying that you're
nonsense.
being accused of being a Marxist, and that's not
you're
twaddle.
asking me if
That's called reporting.
No, I'm not. I'm not a Marxist. I'm an elected official of the RMT. I'm a working class bloke leading a trade union dispute about jobs, pay and conditions of service. So it's got nothing to do with Marxism. It's all about this dispute. It's an industrial dispute, yes. And that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. I emphasise I am not talking twaddle and accusing you of being a Marxist. I'm merely quoting people who are, including many of the newspapers.
Well, that's what it sounds like to me.
Well, I'm sorry if it did, but I don't think it was. But anyway, to be absolutely clear, you are not a Marxist. Fine.
Not to mention the also bizarre questioning from Piers Morgan about Mick Lynch's Facebook profile picture.
Let me show you what I believe is your Facebook page. I want you to confirm or deny if this is your Facebook page. It's a picture of the hood from Thunderbirds.
Can you see the likeness?
Well, I'm just wondering where the comparison goes, because he was obviously an evil, criminal, terrorist mastermind, described as the world's most dangerous man who wreaked utter carnage and havoc on the public.
Is that the level you're pitching this at, Piers? That is a joke amongst me and my friends, and you can see the likeness, if you like.
So you're not denying that you are comparing yourself to the hood?
I'm not comparing myself to anyone. I'm me.
You've literally made your profile picture the hood. And I'm simply saying I was a massive...
If it was a bunch of
flowers,
Thunderbirds
fan, and the hood was the most dangerous, evil person in the world.
He's the most evil puppet made out of vinyl in the world. Is that the level your journalism's at these days?
I simply asked you if that was you and your Facebook page.
Well, do you think I look like the most evil person in the world, Piers?
Well, now you're asking me to answer a difficult question, Mick. I don't know you that well. All I'm saying is you have personally...
I don't think I'm the most evil person in the world. I think I'm a working-class bloke who's leading a trade union in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions.
I understand.
Now, Curtis, what are your thoughts on the behaviour of our media this week? Where are they going wrong?
Well, really, there hasn't been a proper union correspondence in the mainstream media, especially from the BBC, for decades. It used to be standard practice that unions had a big representation in the political discourse. That a new management took over and the right-wing free market revolution took hold. The BBC went the same way. The BBC became way more reliant on the business community, and unions essentially all being silenced. Now, the mainstream media can't seem to handle industrial disputes. The journalists we have today, they're not equipped for the discourse surrounding it. So when you've got someone like Mick Lynch, who who isn't just putting his point of view across, isn't just defending the strikes. He's actually calling out on their bullshit. He's making them look like fools, and these journalists aren't used to that. And I think a lot of people are responding to that. There are most people in this country who despise the media. I think we do. That's why we're doing independent media. There are many people who have a very low trustworthy of the media. Britain has the least amount of trust in Europe when it comes to our mainstream media. So when someone comes along, it doesn't matter if you're the left or the right, when someone comes along and essentially calls bullshit on these corporate journalists, these mainstream legacy media journalists, then people do respond to that.
And I think that's why he is coming across so well in the interviews that we've seen this week, and why actually he is quite popular, I think, amongst people, because he seems to have some good policies and good, moral compass and a good politics, essentially. But also, like you say, he's not afraid to call bullshit on stupid questions, stupid questioning, just general bad journalism from these presenters and journalists.
And I've seen on Twitter, some people have been saying that, he's got a really good... He's a masterclass in what he's doing in terms of dismantling these journalists. And I argue that he's not so much... he doesn't have a good strategy, or he's providing a masterclass. He's just simply speaking from the heart, and he's speaking from principle. So once you do that, and obviously he doesn't care about a long-term career in TV, he's not approaching this thinking, right, I better tone it down because they might not have me on. Well, they can't. This is a big union dispute. The media want to interview him. He's got, for the next, couple of weeks, he will be on the airwaves, so he doesn't need to almost censor himself or tone himself down. Now, there's many people, many politicians or many commentators who want to, should I say, toe the line a little bit, because they're thinking, do you know what, if I make a fool of myself or if I go too aggressive, they're not going to have me on anymore. That's not the problem for Mick Lynch. So he can really speak from the heart and really be honest. And people responding to that, even people who might not necessarily agree with the strikes or a bit ambiguous on it, they're responding to him. And I think it's fantastic. I think he's showing up the mainstream media for what they are. I think he's showing up the journalists. You've got people like Richard Madeley, Kay Burley, people like Julie Hartley-Brewer, who aren't in their position because they're particularly good at their jobs. They're not in this position because they're particularly intelligent. They're in that position because of what they think. They're expendable to the establishment or to corporate interests. That's why they're sat there. If they thought differently, someone else would be sat there. So these so-called journalists who are essentially a mouthpiece for power, for the establishment, they are just a literal mouthpiece, and there's no shred of integrity. There's nothing investigative about these journalists. They're simply defending power and capital.
Another thing that's become quite apparent this week, and it's not necessarily anything new, but it's how much the media love to pit the working class against one another. We're seeing a lot of arguments of, but now doctors and nurses can't get to work, and so-and-so can't get to a doctor's appointment, and this kid can't get to school, etc., etc. But these people on strike are also working class people. Why does the media love to create this culture war, this sense of outrage, and steer us away from, I suppose in some ways I'm answering the question, but why do they like to steer us away from where our outrage should be directed at, and that's the CEOs? Why do they do this?
Well, that's exactly that, isn't it? Elites, those in power, have done this divide and rule tactic for decades, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It used to be about race. They still do it, but it used to be largely about race. And then now they're doing it in terms of strikes, because the worry for people in power, the worry for CEOs, the worry for politicians that support capital and big business is the labour force coming together, the working class coming together, because unity is strength. This is just as simple as that. So in order to break down solidarity, in order to pit workers against each other, then there's talking points that these journalists will come up with, and one of them is, well, why is this person striking because they're on such a good wage? And by the way, yes, train drivers are not striking, and they're on a very good wage. They're on a good wage because they're in a union. They'll point to people who on a lower wage. They'll say like, well, nurses are getting paid like 33 grand a year. They're saying there's other people who can't get to work because of what you're doing. And it is just a divide and rule tactic. And what we need to do is change the narrative and essentially say, well, nurses are on poor pay because they don't have representation of their views or representation of their material conditions. Now, it's funny as well because those that work for the NHS, the government is their biggest employer. So when you've got Tories, you've got health secretaries going on TV and saying, well, look, poor old nurses, they're getting such a poor wage in regards to train drivers. Well, you should pay them better. You're the employee or the employer here. Pay them better. So it's a way to distract the failings of the government. It's a way to distract those from less material conditions or poorer material conditions compared to their bosses. And yeah, it's just a divide and rule tactic. It's been done for centuries, and it's going to continue to happen, really.
Before we move on, I just want to share this very odd, but also quite humorous clip from BBC Question Time of the strike of the Karens.
Do you think the RMT is taking the wrong approach?
Yes, and look what happened to the dinosaurs.
Well, they were around for a very long time.
They're not with us now, though, are
million
they?
years.
The eyes were intimidating.
Well, if you work in hospitality or the service sector, you know exactly what that look is about. It's actually quite scary.
It was scary. And I also like this tweet here describing her as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So moving on, and although this show will mainly cover stories from the UK, I can't ignore our very normal cousins over in the States this week. Yesterday, the Supreme Court voted to overturn Roe v Wade in a move that will see states able to completely ban and criminalise abortion. In a tweet from President Biden, he writes, "Make no mistake, today's overruling of Roe v Wade is the culmination of a deliberate effort over decades to upset the balance of our law. It's a realisation of an extreme ideology and a tragic error by the Supreme Court." Roe v Wade was a piece of legislation brought in by the Supreme Court in 1973 that allowed the Constitution to protect the rights of pregnant women and therefore their right to have an abortion if they so wished. Therefore, no state could outright ban abortion, although obviously in recent years we have seen a lot of pushback and tougher restrictions being brought in by Republican states. The Supreme Court now overturning this have essentially said that no, they don't think it's a constitutional right for women to make their own choice and have autonomy over their own body. So now essentially states will be able to make the choice for them. And as I said, we're going to see a huge increase in the number of states that are going to ban abortion with criminal consequences to those that obtain, but also those that assist with abortion. Rightly so, people from across the world are outraged. This will not stop abortion. This will only stop safe abortion. Cases of rape or incest are most likely not going to be exempt from criminal punishment. Neither will medical treatments following complications with pregnancy or miscarriage. For example, if a woman had an ectopic pregnancy or if the fetus died somewhere along during the pregnancy and a woman would need a medical abortion, that is not going to be included in any form of exemption, which means women are going to be killed. Women will die. There's no way to put it, to be completely honest. Many Democrats are now saying that this is why we need to get out and vote. Obviously not us, but in America. This is why we need to get out and vote. But I was wondering, maybe, Curtis, if you could explain why, when they have a Democrat president, that this was still able to happen. Can I kind of get your thoughts on this?
Right, okay, so yes, you're right. The Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Yet they did nothing to codify Roe v. Wade. Now, Democrats have had the power for, 50, 60 years to enshrine this into law. Nancy Pelosi once said quite recently that being pro-choice is hurting the Democratic Party. And you've got to remember, there are many pro-lifers in the Democratic Party. Now, what makes this so disgusting is that Democrats have used Roe v. Wade as a political ploy to get votes. Nancy Pelosi has sent out a fundraising email, literally hours after the decision, encouraging those to vote in November. saying that women's rights are on the ballot paper. That's disgraceful, because what the Democrats are doing, and what they've done for years, is they purposely made sure that Roe v Wade wasn't codified. They wanted the idea that abortions could be banned. They wanted that risk to be there so they could use it as a wedge issue for votes. So saying you should go out and vote to protect women's rights is complete crap. It's crap, because the people did already vote. They voted for Joe Biden in the general election, and it secured a majority of House, Senate of the Democrats, and obviously you've got a Democratic presidency. So yeah, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the liberal icon, should I say. She was a Democratic justice, and she refused to retire because she was old. She refused to retire under Barack Obama, and a lot of people predicted that she might die under a Trump presidency, which is what happened. And the aftermath of that is that Trump was then allowed to replace her with a GOP justice. Had she put her ego aside, allowed for a younger Democratic justice, then Roe v. Wade would have not been overturned. So I think that the Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans in this. I think that the policies are very similar. One of them says they care about women's rights. One of them overtly says they don't care. But really, what's the point in being told you need to go out and vote when the people have already done that and nothing is being done?
You already have voted and nothing. It's to me, that doesn't actually give incentive to vote for them again. Because if you voted Democrat last time and this has been allowed to happen, in my mind I'd be thinking, well, why would I vote for you again? Because surely you had the power to do something. I gave you the power to do something and you chose not to take it. That's not an incentive to vote for them again, in my opinion. If we were still under a Trump presidency or general Republican presidency in general, then yeah, absolutely. They've got that driving force behind them to say, look what they've done, it's so awful, blah, blah, blah. You need to vote for us. But they don't have that leverage this time. They are in charge. Even in Barack Obama's presidency and during his presidency, as you said, like RBG didn't retire, but he even said that abortion rights or, writing this into law essentially so it couldn't, be overturned in this way wasn't a priority for him. But women, this is a women's rights issue, this is a human rights issue, and it then leads on to other constitutions or other rules, other laws also being questioned, because I can't remember what his name is, Justice Clarence Thomas, is that it?
Thomas,
yeah, he has now basically said, we can put the actual quote up on the screen, but he's essentially said that he believes they now need to be considering the rights around contraception, the rights around same-sex marriage, and the rights around basic consensual private sexual relations. So this is not just a problem for women. This is not just a women's issue, because it's around, we're talking about abortion, we're talking about people who can get pregnant, people with wombs and uteruses. This is going to be, an avalanche for other issues to come up essentially and be questioned. Obviously in America as well, we also have the issue that, guns essentially now have more rights than women. A cluster of cells has more rights now than a live, grown female person. Just a few weeks ago, we saw another mass shooting, and more children heartlessly killed when it could have been prevented. And rightly so, it brings up conversations of gun laws, gun control, and a lot of Republicans will run with the sort of argument that banning guns won't stop people getting their hands on guns, but they kind of seemingly have, been quite happy to ignore that argument when it comes to abortions. As I said earlier, banning abortions is not going to stop abortions happening. And ironically, they call themselves pro-life, but they, like I said, they're given more rights to a gun. Yeah, they're given more rights to a gun, an object, than a person. They're giving more rights to a cluster of cells than a person. And this comes from a country that doesn't even have universal healthcare or a decent welfare system. I mean, have you got anything that you kind of want to add on to that?
Well, this is fundamentally the thing about conservatives. They're not consistent. It's like, yes, we are pro-life. We care about an unborn fetus. But as soon as they're born, that's it. They don't care. Yeah. They're happy to decimate the welfare state. Yeah. They are vehemently against socialised healthcare. They wrap themselves in patriotism. Yet when veterans come home, they don't care. They don't support them. They don't fund public services to make sure their mental health is okay, or they've got a fucking house. So they don't care about these things. They don't care about life. What this is harking back to the ultra-conservative religious extremism. The US is essentially a theocracy. It's supposed to be a secular nation where you govern based on the rights of people rather than religion. Now, our country is supposed to be a Christian nation. However, no nation should be based on any particular religion. It's secular. You have freedom from religion and you have freedom to practice religion, whether you're a Muslim, you're Jewish, or you're Christian. But in the US, and especially the Republican Party, want it to be a theocracy where they govern based on the Bible. Which is funny because the Bible is completely contradictory because thousands of different people contributed to it over a long period of time. So yeah, it comes from their obviously deeply held ultra-conservative beliefs, but also quite clearly it is misogynistic. It's a way to control women because they don't apply the same logic as you alluded to guns. Now, the argument is we cannot ban guns because people are going to get their hands on it anyway. Well, please, be consistent. Apply that logic to abortion, because if you make abortion illegal, it won't stop abortions. It will mean that people are going to get illegal abortions, it's going to be less safe, and people are going to die. Same with drugs. You cannot legislate drugs out of existence. People are going to do it regardless. So you need to see this as a health issue, not a moral issue. And there are many people who might personally be uncomfortable with abortions, but might still then say, but I still am pro-choice because I believe that women should have a right to choose. That's absolutely fine. I mean, I'm particularly pro-choice even in my moral compass, but people might not support that, but they still say women's right to choose. But the US and the way the Supreme Court have governed is essentially 4 or 5 people, unelected, by the way, no one gets a vote on it, to control the lives of millions of people. And let's also not forget, it's not just about women. Let's remember our trans comrades and trans men. They're going to be in danger too. So anyone who can give birth, anyone can get pregnant. But it's a gateway to ripping up the rights of minorities, and it won't stop there. They're going to come for trans people, gay people, lesbian, non-binary. They're going to come for all of them. Yeah.
And as you said, it's a health issue, but it is also a class issue, because if any of these people who have gone and made these decisions, if their daughter, family member, anyone got into a situation where they needed an abortion, they will be able to still get one safely, without consequence, because they've got the money to be able to do it. This is going to force so many already, poor people into even more desperate situations. And, as we said before, you can't force people to give birth and have children when you're then also not going to provide them with decent healthcare, maternity or paternity pay, any sort of welfare, or, benefits or anything like that. Most people work multiple jobs anyway, trying to feed themselves, let alone feeding a child that they didn't want to have, couldn't abort for obviously now legal reasons. And it's just cool. It's making poor people poorer. It's pushing them into more desperate situations, making their situations even worse. And yeah, like you said, they're going to come for other people's rights, other minority groups' rights. Obviously, in this country, there isn't really as much of an appetite for that kind of conversation around abortion or pro-choice, pro-life. We generally, as Brits, kind of take that more stiff upper lip approach, which obviously is not really healthy. But we do tend to follow in the political footsteps of the state. We see a lot of mirrored policies and politics. So do you think we should be worried about, the possibility that this is going to open up the conversation more so in this country, and that, is there a chance that our rights could also be reversed here in the UK?
Well, ask me a few years ago and I probably would have said no. And I'm actually surprised that Roe V Wade has actually been overturned. I thought we've made so much progress that the GOP, right-wing parties, Conservatives don't have enough political capital to do this. It turns out they don't need any political capital, they're just going to do it. So, yeah, I am very worried. Now, the British people are entirely sensible on this issue. I know if you poll them on many other things, you might think, fuck me, they're not sensible on certain issues. But on this, the British people got it bang on. Around 90% of the British people believe that women should have a right to choose. They support abortions, or they support the right to choose, not necessarily support abortions, right? But they're on the right side of this. Yeah. However, what's happening now is there's a big export of US debates coming to this country. Now, if you look at the new sort of media we're getting on our TVs recently, like GB News, you're getting more Piers Morgan on Talk TV. Even if you just watch it, look at the studio, look at the aesthetics of it, they look very Americanized. Yeah. The debate format is also very much Americanized. So in that sense, it's really creeping in. Now, there was a story I covered fairly recently that someone was going to appear on the BBC and talking about abortion. And was essentially going to say, look, the British people, the debate is settled, the British people on the right side of the history of this, thank God we don't have to go through this debate, etc. The BBC then decided to cancel her appearance and bring on a pro and con, basically, argument. Yes, they wanted to get someone who's a pro-lifer, forced birth, as I say, and a pro-choicer, and they were going to debate. Well, the BBC, which our taxpayers are funding, is copying Fox News now. Yeah. We don't need to have this forced debate on whether it's right or wrong. We've already debated that. So in this country, the mainstream media is drumming up culture wars and creating a debate where there doesn't need to be one. Now, when it comes to positive change, that comes from the grassroots. But if you notice, when there's reactionary, when there's racism, that comes from the top. Just like Donald Trump. Now, racism existed before Donald Trump. Many liberals might think it didn't, but it clearly did. However, the difference between Donald Trump is that he overtly would say racist things, xenophobic things. And the GOP...
opened a platform to allow others to say those kinds of things as well.
Yeah.
That they were already thinking.
Essentially they're already thinking, but political correctness kept this at bay. People might be thinking it, but they essentially said, well, I better not say that. That's good. I don't want people overtly saying racist things in public. And even the Democrats and the GOP were supporting policies that were definitely racist. The GOP would still pretend that they weren't racist. Now, Trump changed that. What happened? That means hate crimes had peaked. That gave conservative supporting outlets, right-wing outlets, people like Ben Shapiro and others, were now becoming more and more overt in what they were thinking. And they felt, actually, there is a space I can voice my real opinions. That's really worrying. And the same thing can happen here. Boris Johnson is like, kind of like the British version of Trump, where he's saying more and more extreme things. And whilst the British people might not necessarily believe that, over time, if they get a license from their politicians, if we get a license from our presidents and prime ministers, you're going to see more and more of this happening. So yes, I think a debate surrounding abortion seems to be settled in this country, but we have to make sure we defend these rights because it's not a foregone conclusion.
Mm-hmm. I could keep talking about this all day. So much more to say on it, but I'm going to move on to our final story, which is about this week's by-election results. So, the Tories have lost 2 by-elections this week, one in Wakefield to Labour and one in Tiverton to the Lib Dems. Quite horrifyingly, the by-election in Wakefield was called because former MP Imran Ahmed Khan was jailed for sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy in 2008. So it's not really surprising that the Tories lost that one. Labour had held the seat since 1930, but lost in the 2019 general election. The Conservatives won with 47% of the vote in 2019 to Labour's 39%. However, on Thursday, Labour won the seat back with 48% of the vote, which is up 8 points from the previous election, to the Tories' 30%, down 13 points. In Tiverton, Lib Dems won with 52.9% of the votes, up 38% on 2019, and the Tories got only 38.5%, down 21% from 2019, so a huge gain there for the Lib Dems. Labour, quite embarrassingly I think, only received 3.7%, down 15.9 points, and resulting in them losing their deposit. So what do these two results say about the state of today's politics in the UK, would you say, Curtis?
Really, it's reaffirming what we already thought. Wakefield was a solidly Labour seat. You said it's been held from then since the 30s. 2019 went to the Conservatives, and now it's won back by Labour. What was unique about the 2019 general election? It was a Brexit election. So I think what happened there is a blip to the Conservatives to ensure Brexit got done, shall I say. Now, Brexit hasn't disappeared. It's still a massive political issue, massive constitutional crisis, but it's sort of parked itself in the mainstream debate for now. So people are looking at other ways or looking at different things when it comes to voting. So I don't think there's anything spectacular about this. Labour should have won the seat. They did win the seat. What this is a disaster for Boris Johnson. He's lost 2 seats. His position is now incredibly weak. Will he lead the next general election? I don't know. I think if you're a Tory MP, you're going to want to get rid of him. He is now becoming a liability. He received a confidence vote quite recently. He won it. However, if you look at the numbers, Margaret Thatcher, Theresa May, she had more MPs backing her when she won the confidence vote. Boris Johnson had less people backing him. They both resigned. So his position is untenable. The win for Labour is obviously good. It is obviously good. But polling data actually shows that the win in Wakefield was more to do with the fact that Tories didn't go out and vote, rather than Labour necessarily taking Tory voters. Now, what do they get? 47% of the vote, 48% of the vote. If you look historically at the recent elections, the general elections, going back to 1983, you'll see that the share of the vote for Labour has been around 45% to 52%. So there's nothing really out of whack when it comes to the percentage of the vote. Now, of course, 2019 they lost it, but they still got, I believe, over 40%. 2017 they got 50% of the vote. 1997 they got 57% of the vote. Obviously, that was a huge landslide victory. But yeah, it seems to be hovering around 45 to 52% of votes. There's nothing spectacular about this. It just looks like that Labour managed to essentially keep their base, but the Tories, their vote dramatically dropped. In Tiverton, I think this is a fantastic win for Lib Dems. The vote swing is absolutely seismic. But obviously you did note that the Lib Dems lost a deposit in Wakefield and Labour lost a deposit in Tiverton. So it's clear that tactical voting was severely present. Going forward, though, for the Labour Party, they're going to want to keep Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson has been the strategy for the Labour Party. It's like, hey, look, vote for us because we're not this guy. We're not him. We're competent. We can manage the country better. And if Boris Johnson goes and someone else who looks competent, I don't think there's many competent Tory MPs, but if someone kind of looks competent, that's going to force the Labour Party to move elsewhere, change their strategy to what? Policies, vision, ideas, in which they have none.
So do you think then this is going to be the kick up the bum that Labour need? Like, obviously you said really the reason why they won Wakefield was because Tory voters didn't go out and vote, but you did also touch on the fact that 2019 was a Brexit election, and obviously now that, yes, Brexit, is still a thing, we're still kind of going through the consequences of Brexit, but it's not really as much of a talking point anymore. So, therefore maybe people who voted, who didn't, well, not, I was going to say voted Tory, or in particular, I suppose, didn't vote Labour because of their stance on Brexit in the 2019 election. Is this now Labour's opportunity to, like you say, talk about what they stand for, what their policies are, to kind of gain back those voters that they lost? Now People are more interested in the cost of living and that kind of like bread and butter politics and everyday politics that we go through, and our living standards and everything. I haven't really seen a lot of what Labour stands for. Do you think we might start to see that now?
Well, they certainly have an opportunity to do so. Will they? No, definitely not. You're right, because Brexit has been slightly parked for a bit. This gives Labour an opportunity to talk about the bread and butter issues. If you ask people, and polling has shown this, that who do you trust more on tackling the cost of living crisis, they will say Labour. Because we've had the Tories for the last 12 years, because we've had all these huge crises in the last decade, no one seems to believe that Conservatives can actually do anything about it, and that's where Labour can pick up votes, an opportunity on this. The problem is, Labour don't seem to be doing that. They've been outflanked to the left by the Conservatives on many issues. When it came to corporation tax rises a few years ago, the Labour Party said, now is not the time, don't raise corporation tax. Rishi Sunak said, we should raise corporation tax. When it comes to energy discounts, the Labour said, they're going to give £350, £400 to the lowest earners to help with energy prices. Well, the Conservatives came in and outflanked to the left and offered even higher prices. So materially, Labour isn't saying anything on the economy, which is dangerous, because I feel like the opportunities the Tories are giving to the Labour Party, they're giving them a path to power. They're saying, take the keys to Downing Street. And to simply say we're not the Tories, to try and outflank them rhetorically on the right in terms of the economy, say we're more sensible on the economy, isn't going to work. Now, historically, progressive parties in the US, Democrats, over here, the Labour Party, centre-left parties, do better on higher turnouts. So it's not good enough to simply say nothing on the big crisis we all face today and just simply say we're not the Tories. You're not going to enthuse your base. You're not going to enthuse voters. If you look at polling now in terms of voting intention in the midterms, yes, the Labour Party are ahead. Some polling have put them over 10 percentage points above the Tories, but that doesn't say anything about the election results. 2023 maybe is going to be the next general election. That doesn't say anything about that, because Ed Miliband, a lot of the times he was ahead of the Tories by 10%. Look what happened there. What matters in the general election is getting people out to vote. Asking people now, what do you think about the state of politics? Well, they're only going to be people like me, policy wonks, people who spend every single day and involve themselves in politics. They're the sort of people who are responding to polling data. And obviously, if you look at the state of politics today, look at the state of politics in the last few years, liberal pundits, those are policy wonks, political nerds, are going to choose Labour. But everyday people who don't follow politics, who only get out and vote during general election, that's a completely different story.
And I'd have to say, I am one of those people. Obviously, I am slightly more engaged in general day-to-day politics, but only to a certain extent, if I'm completely honest. I will get way more into it during a general election, and I think, like you said, most people are also going to do that. When you're in this current period that we're in now of that in-between stage, obviously, some places get a by-election for whatever reason. Not that doesn't happen to everybody. So it kind of feels like when there isn't a general election on, you can't really change anything that's going on right now. We can all sit here and say that the cost of living crisis is awful and none of us feel like we're in good positions, but it also feels like, what can we do right now? Because there is, we're probably a couple of years away from another general election. And I think that disengages people from politics. To the point that then they can be potentially easily swung when the general elections do come around, and they actually want to try and decide who to vote for, I suppose.
That's the issue with local democracy. There's a lack of local democracy, isn't there? You look at turnout in this election, you look at turnout on all by-elections, you look at turnout on council elections, the local elections. They're far lower than a general election. That's an obvious point, of course, because when there's a national election, more is at stake, but also there's a massive hype. There's a media hype around it. It's bigger stake, isn't it? It's the great will of the British people to decide the democratic or the democratic world, the great British people are taking a historic democratic vote. Of course, yes, there's going to be way more hype. And no one's going to be expecting the same level of turnout in a by-election and general election, but there still is a issue. There is a disconnect, and it is important that people do get involved in the political process. However, I don't blame voters. The political system is alienating. You look inside the House of Lords, what does it look like? It looks like a blast from the 16th century, and it's not been updated since. It doesn't represent people in this country. We're a multiracial country. It's a place full of old white men, old white landlords, essentially. And nothing's really changed from that. So it's incredibly alienating, and it is hard to get people involved in the political process. But then that's, elites and those in power benefit from those who don't really get involved. But again, it's not the fault of voters, it's our political process.
Well, hopefully we can kind of do our bit to get more people involved and engaged. Let's leave it there for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this new format, please give us a like and a share. And if you want more content from Turn Left, please remember to hit that subscribe button. If you're feeling extra generous, why not become a regular supporter for as little as £3 per month by heading to patreon.com/turnleftmedia. See you next time.